So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'm here with Rachel Ziegler, an activist from Direct Action Everywhere. Many of you have probably seen her in the news recently. She very famously disrupted Bernie Sanders with a group of other people at a campaign rally, and I'm really excited to have her here. So thank you so much for coming, Rachel. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So why don't we let's just hear a little bit about you. So tell me a little bit about like who you are, how you came to join DXE, and just sort of take us through how you got into activism.
Sure. So, I guess I went vegan like 6 or so years ago, and about a year into that, I started doing activism. I was just organizing these little bull riding protests and little here and there circus protests. And then a friend of mine was like, hey, there's this group called DXE. There's a chapter in Philly and they're doing an action this weekend. Do you want to come? So we went there together, and it's like a 2.5-hour drive, but where I was in Pennsylvania, there wasn't really much around. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we went there, and there was like 20 people, and we did this Whole Foods action. I think it was like the Ghost in Our Machine. And I was just really blown away by that style of activism. It was just so radical. It was so different than anything I'd experienced, especially in rural Pennsylvania, where you never see activism, period, and you never see other vegans. So it was later that year that I went to the Animal Rights Conference in DC. It was 2015, and I met Wayne and Priya and a bunch of other people in DXE, Brian Burns, and from that conference, I went home and started my own chapter, and then went to the DXE Forum, which is now called the ALC. But I went to that in 2016 and just met all these people who I'd been following online and admiring. And I moved to New York, got involved in that chapter, and within a year, I made my way to Berkeley. And the activism really changed a lot whenever I moved here, of course, because there's just so many more people, so many more resources. And I became a full-time activist for a little under 2 years. So I was doing that full-time. And then I decided to stop doing that. And I now work at a vegan restaurant, and I do DXE activism in my spare time.
Wow. And the restaurant's the Butcher's Son, right?
Yeah, the Butcher's Son. Very popular Berkeley restaurant.
Yeah, I love that place. Last time I was in Berkeley, I went there, and I think that was the last meal I had. And I think that's like, when I think back to Berkeley, that's the taste in my mouth of their sandwiches.
Oh, a lot of oil.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple of things. So like, one question a lot of people always ask is like, what draws people to get into activism? And I think that one thing you pointed out was like the style of it, like this really radical kind of style of like the Ghost in the Machine activism, right? And actually, just so the people can hear, what we're hearing some of your friends right now, right?
Yeah, I live with 2 doves and 2 king pigeons. They're all rescued. This is Ezra that you can hear right now. And this is like a call that he does to get his wife, Gretel, to pay attention to him. I don't know where she is, but.
Okay. So if we hear him stop, that means that she's paying attention to him, maybe?
Yeah. I could try to mute myself whenever.
No, it's totally fine.
Okay.
No, it's good. Because I think it's good to have you like in your natural setting among. Oh, I think he's done. Oh, I guess not. All right. Yeah, cool. But tell me more about that. So what was it about the really like radical style that drew you in back in Philly?
It was just, people who were vegan, people doing activism, and like in such a bold, unapologetic way. as before, I'd experienced a lot of, I guess, what I would refer to as, and it's like passive, more of like a passive approach. It's like, take this flyer, but sorry, go vegan, but only if you want to, like, which is, there's nothing wrong with that and with outreach, but I just was blown away by DXC's approach to just be like, no, this is not okay, and I'm not going to stand by and watch. Like, I'm going to go into the restaurant, which I just, even that in itself just seemed so radical and so bold to me, to like actually go inside somewhere to bring that message in, knowing that it's, borders on the line of breaking the law, and it's just riskier, and just it's so uncomfortable. And I think that's part of it too, is that, I remember going into the Whole Foods with this sign and just being just like mortified by the fact that I didn't want to like look people in the eye. I was like very like, oh, I'm sorry, I felt really empowered by that too. And just we each had a line to say, so I don't remember what I said, but it was like one part of this like poem speak out style, and even just saying that one line was like, wow, there's like so many nerves going. And but it was also just the type of people who that attracted, which was just, again, very like bold people who were like, yeah, I'm like, no, people shouldn't be eating animals, and yeah, we're going to go protest, and we're not going to be apologetic about it, and we're going to challenge society. And I had just never heard anything like that before, so it was very inspiring to be around that sort of mentality.
Yeah. So it's like, we're often told, here's this really indirect method you can use. You can just kind of, like, a lot of people will use, I think, like, indirect action somewhere, and you want it to do direct action everywhere, right?
I don't know if I've heard of that. That's good.
Yeah, I made a lot of puns about this I think it's the first time I've used that one. But
Nice.
yeah, what's interesting is like, you wanted to go in where the thing was happening and like say, hey, like, this is a problem. I'm gonna I'm gonna speak truth right in these situations. I'm not gonna do this really kind of indirect approach. And it sounds to me like, from what you're saying, that what drew you in was sort of like this inner feeling that was like satisfying and like a compelling way of doing activism. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that, like, we talk about like why people go in to do activism, and I think that what draws a lot of people to some approaches, like like leafleting, is they'll think, well, I have some reason to believe that this is effective, so I want to do it that way. And it sounds to me like what you're describing is more of like this kind of like visceral pull towards really radical forms of activism, where it just kind of feels right to do it that way. Does that sound fair?
Yeah. It's funny because I guess I haven't really given a lot of deep thought as to why I'm drawn to this versus others. And I guess the only thing I guess what you said sounds pretty accurate, in that it feels better. And I guess also with DXC, there's
I'm loving that. It's so funny.
With DXC specifically, I think something about it too is like, I feel like it's very effective, and the mission is very inspiring, like the 40-year roadmap, just the way that people talk about animal liberation within DXC it seems achievable. It seems very measured. Just comparing it to other movements, that to me is like, I think something that really, really draws me and other people into it. So, and it feels more direct, like you said, like to go into a place, to go out there and actually do. It feels like you're doing something, and whether we'll see whether or not it actually is. Time can only tell, but it's still a very, very new network.
Yeah, and I think like what I'm hearing you say is that maybe what drew you in initially was this kind of feeling this is radical and this is like it's satisfying. It's what I want to do emotionally. But then maybe what led you to stay was the stories that they tell that actually make it seem effective. So it's like you've mentioned the 40-year roadmap. I went to Berkeley in 2017, and I think that was the first time I saw the 40-year roadmap kind of like laid out, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool. They have a plan for doing social change." And then the more I was hanging out with like Zach Groff, who's no longer with DXE, but other people like
Mm.
that who think a lot about social movement theory, um, and they're really concerned with like Erica Chenoweth's research, and now I think they're really into. Everybody's now all of a sudden really into this is an uprising, um, and they
Mm.
have this like momentum-driven organizing approach now where they they really want to take the latest kind of thinking in social movements to like inform their stuff. So I guess what I'm suggesting is, and I'm wondering how you feel when I say this, it sounds like maybe you got into it originally because you felt some like emotional pull towards the style of activism, and then maybe what led you to kind of like stay was um, the the plan and like the thought that this is actually going to accomplish something. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a huge part of it, as well as just the community here. Uh, there's nothing that I've experienced that compares to the community here. A big part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Wonderful. So let's transition now to from our appetizer to the main entree. So the Bernie Sanders disruption. So tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about that, and maybe first you could just explain in your own words, like what happened, and yeah, go for it.
So yeah, I think I was asked like maybe 2 days before, 2 or 3 days before the before the actual event. Because as these things go, I guess they don't announce the dates until very soon beforehand. So, Matt does his usual calling me up and like, I think he texted me this time, but hey, high profile, action coming up. Do you want to be part of it? Sort of thing. And I think he always knows that I'm like down for this sort of thing. As long as I was like, sure, yeah, let me see if I can get off work first. I was supposed to cover someone's shift, and then I got someone to cover that. And because it just sounded really intriguing, I didn't know all the details of it. But I know Matt is like a very, like he's a pro at this. He's done many of these. I've disrupted Bernie with him twice in the past. And so, and of course, there is some sort of like thrill aspect to it too, where it's like, and it feels very direct. And I knew that if Matt was involved, it would likely be successful and get press, and it would be worth investing that time into, because he's like, we're gonna rent a van and go down to Nevada, and I'm just like, oh man, it's like a whole weekend trip thing.
Wow.
It's, yeah. So was there like 11 or 13 of us or something, and yeah, there was like this whole last minute chaotic coordinating of like who was going to pick up when, where do we meet. And so we met at Dingo Den, the actress house that I used to live at and Matt now lives at. And, did some going over the plans, a lot of briefing, had all these like materials laid out, fake blood and just all kinds of last minute things we were trying to get together. There's like the calf hutch that I don't think we ended up really being able to use, but that was going to be like outside of the building. And yeah, I was just like on the van, went to drove to the hotel where we, were doing some more briefing. And the whole thing was just, I wish that someone would have followed us around with like a camera, because the whole thing was just very, very movie like, just very chaotic, and the plans sort of just kept changing depending on like different details we would find out about the venue. Oh, they allow this, not that, and you know, just all these little things. So yeah, I mean, when we were getting ready that morning, me and Audrey and Carla, writing the things on our chest, and it's like, do we use blood? Do we not use blood? What should we write? There's all these different things that we go through, and we, we had to like pick clothes that were going to be like easy to take off. So we were like practicing like like taking off our shirts really quickly.
Wow. That's a
Yeah,
tactical
like
consideration I never even thought about, but like shirts off quickly. Wow, that's
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I like made sure to wear like my really comfy tennis shoes because I knew like if I was going to be jumping around. But yeah, we were practicing for taking them off quickly, and I don't know, we were all just like really nervous that morning, and we had people go like in pairs so that we weren't too suspicious. We were trying to figure out like, all right, what can we get in here? So we were like packing things very intentionally. Like, can we get the sign in? Yeah, there wasn't like very high security there, so we were able to just pretty much walk in. Before we even got there, we stopped at this like Walmart in the parking lot. We were like putting together the cartons. And so we were just like taping on this white paper, writing milk on it, and filling it with like cornstarch. And like we could like, we were worried that the blood wouldn't be red enough. And looking back now, like I think that was true too. But so there I was like in the sink with like this carton inside this bag, just like putting water in it, trying not to look suspicious. And meanwhile, like you could see like at the top of our chest, it said like "let."
oh
Like
wow.
both me and Audrey had that, so I was trying to like kind of cover it up, and we were just so nervous. And so we would like wait until people like, they come in the bathroom, kind of leave, and then we'd like shake up the bottle, put more water in it, shake up the bottle, and then we were just walking around with like these grocery bags with this like, carton, and just walking around. And it's very interesting being in that environment because what's about to go down in like, the next hour or two, and you're trying to just look very inconspicuous and stuff. So we were trying to make friends with people, and Carla, one of my co-topless defendants, she was like making friends with a lot of the people who are going to be backstage. So she was actually the reason we were able to get behind Bernie, because she's just being really outgoing, really friendly, and like, oh hey, can I get in there too? Because everyone who went back there had like a blue wristband, but she was able to get like 5 of us in there. And so she had like this giant "Let Dairy Die" banner, and I don't even know like how she got that in, but it was her and Kathy who had that, and then it was Priya in the middle, and then me and Audrey on the end. And it's like an hour until it actually started though. So of course the whole time I'm just like mapping out in my head like, all right, how are we going to get from point A to point B? You have to, because just looking at it, the person who led us on the stage told us to put our bags like down on the floor, which was like around the corner. So it's like, okay, we're gonna have to jump down, take off our shirts, grab the carton, take it out of the bag, open the lid, get like underneath this stair thing, they get on the stage, and the whole thing seemed like not impossible, but just like, wow, okay, this is going to be a challenge. And basically, we were waiting for Priya's cue to start, and so I thought she was going to be like, all right guys, I'm going to go in a minute. And the next thing you know, Priya's just like gone, and I didn't even know how far she got, because as soon as I saw her jump off the stage. And of course, the guy who had let all of us up there was like, oh no, which I felt so bad about, because he was just like, oh my God. And I think he was like probably one of the Bernie volunteers. But Audrey and I just hopped off, and I don't even remember what unfolded at that, after that moment, because it was just chaos. Like I don't know how I even like was able to get under and around, because plenty of people could have blocked me. And I remember thinking, like, why is no one stopping me right now? And I think Priya was like distracting them enough, maybe. But I kind of think it's amazing that we got as far as we did. And I remember trying to grab the mic. They turned the mic off. I just kept going. And, the guy took the milk carton from me. And I remember getting like very close to Bernie, actually, and just, saying the lines that Matt told me to say over and over again. And, then we were
just tell me,
arrested.
what were those lines? What were you saying to Bernie?
Yeah, so I was like, I remember us talking in the past of like, remember to just appear very nonviolent, very sympathetic. And so I was trying to like hold my hands and sort of, it was like this and this, I don't remember exactly, but I was saying, Bernie, please stop subsidizing dairy. Bernie, please let dairy die. Bernie, why are you supporting the dairy industry? Those sorts of things. And of course, he was just like, blah, just like booms. I just looked horrified.
And you had a moment with him right then, because like you're there's the famous, I think it should be an iconic picture at this point. You're standing there like this, you don't have your shirt on, Bernie's right in front of you, and he's staring at you. Like, what was that like to have that kind of moment with Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, if you watch a different video, you'll see that I got much closer to him, actually. Okay. It was like, I could have reached out and touched him, wow. But in both of those moments, it was very surreal to me. I don't know. When you're up on stage and when you're in that zone, like your vision kind of goes blurred in a way. Like you just sort of feel like it's like a very strange experience. It's like I don't even remember most of what happened, because there's so much adrenaline, there's so much like anxiety. You're just, it's like that moment of like running out into the football field of people who've activists who have done that too, or even like open rescue. There's just you're in like this sort of high. But I just remember feeling like, kind of bad, honestly, like, oh, poor Bernie, just like, he just looked so angry and upset, so there was definitely some guilt. There's also, I was just thinking like, I need to like, I recognized that there was like all these cameras on me. So I was trying to also just, sort of optics wise, do what I was there to do, which was like deliver a nonviolent message and in a way that would like appear well, I guess, like on camera and stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was just sort of a surreal out of body experience, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
keep going.
Well, just like I guess one thing that surprised me is that I kind of just forgot that I was topless, honestly. Like it didn't even, yeah, I was like, I wasn't even thinking about that while I was up there.
Yeah, well, there is, so it seems to me like you're somebody who cares a lot about, I don't know, being like kind and honorable to the people around you. And the reason why I say that is that you only expressed 3 negative emotions in that whole story, from what I could tell. And the first one was that you were a little bit nervous when you were inside of, actually no, there were 4. First one was like you're in the bathroom, you're a little bit nervous because like you've got these milk cartons and it says "let" on your shirt, and people can, or on your chest, people can see that, and you're trying to like be sort of inconspicuous as you fill this milk carton with, I'm guessing, like whatever was in there and like some red dye, like you got to put some water in there, and you're nervous about getting caught then. Then the second one had to do with the person who let you on stage. And you felt a little bit bad because you had, I guess it wasn't you, it was Carla who had kind of deceived him a little. I mean, I don't think she lied to him, but she was able to sort of like manipulate him using social skills to get all of you on there. You had no idea what was happening. And then there was some anxiety when you were like actually, doing the thing. And then it was just feeling really guilty about Bernie Sanders. And I guess what I'm wondering is like, a substantial element of that kind of activism is like it does involve like tricking people. It does involve like being in these really intense interpersonal, like brief interpersonal relationships, like between you and Bernie, where you were obviously frustrating somebody who you really respect and who was like upset that it was happening. And I'm just wondering, like, could like when I say all that, like, how like what types of thoughts and feelings does that call to mind?
I mean, yeah, it sounds accurate, I guess, as far as I mean, I never really like thought about it, but yeah, I guess there is a lot of those sort of guilty emotions. I mean, even just from walking into a grocery store and feeling bad because you're like ruining someone's day, or when you disrupt, like a dinner on Valentine's Day, it's like, these people are just like out having this nice time, and yeah, at these events, that like, yeah, you're having to like act basically. You're having to act like, you're just there to have fun and you're cheering, and the next thing you know, you've got fake blood all over you with your boobs out, and like people are just like, you can see the people's look on their face who were standing next to you or something, just shocked, like maybe betrayed, and you feel that, you feel that guilt of, yeah, you're right, like, I'm sorry, like I did trick you, or like and you feel this sort of moral confliction. And I
Yeah.
remember in jail, Carla was reflecting on that a lot too, feeling really guilty as the person who kind of spearheaded that at that rally. And but then it's like you also think like, well, you think of why you're doing this, and like that this is sort of what comes with it, and that it's worth it because it is, from my opinion anyway, that it's effective, and that it's worth it because of the impacts it'll have long term, far beyond those few people who were deceived and like negatively impacted in that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about efficacy in just a minute, but I think that I totally hear you. Like, in the times when I've done grocery store disruptions, I've done quite a few of them. Like, I, one of the hardest things for me is like the guilt when I'm looking at this manager, um, and they're like really upset, and it's like, oh, I just really want to have like a interpersonal relationship with you where we can just have a conversation, but that's not your job at that point. Uh,
yeah.
it's tough, but I wanted to point to that though because like both of those things kind of jumped out at me as like important parts of your story, um, that you sort of felt it there. Another thing though, so when I heard you talk about the ghost in the machine activism from the very beginning of this conversation, like you were nervous, right? Like you were a little bit nervous about like to go in, but then when you were talking about like mat content, you'd be like, hey, you want to do a like whatever, like a high risk type of thing that you're totally down for. You described it as intriguing and exciting. And so what I'm wondering
Mm-hmm.
is like when somebody offers you an opportunity like that, is there any sort of like fear in the back of your mind, or is it just like, oh wow, I see the purpose of this. This is intriguing and exciting. Like what's in there? What's going on?
Yeah, there's definitely some fear. Like normally Matt or like anyone in these situations usually reaches out with the initial like, hey, are you interested in being a part of it? We'll talk about details later. And
Mm.
so I'm like, all right, I don't know what exactly I'll be doing. My guess is I'll be running the stage though. Um, and so it was, the fear definitely set in more like the more we talked about it, and like when I had like the role assigned to me, or I guess I volunteered for it, like mutual um, mutual assigning
Right.
to that role, um, and you know, uh, then talking about it being topless, and so like I think the fear started sinking in whenever it was like when we both determined that like, okay, I would, go up on the stage. Like there is both excitement to it and also like that nervousness and fear because I've done that many times in the past at different types of events. And it's just, I mean, the fear for me is a lot of it is like, are we going to be able to pull it off?
Right.
Because it is, you know, they set it up for a reason intentionally for that not to happen. And so
Right.
you are having to figure out a way how you can overcome those situations and get through security. And, you know, but I've also you know, trained people on how to do this. I've run like what we call tier 2 disruptions, where we sneak into events. And so I'm very familiar with doing it. I don't know that it ever gets easier, or if, you know, that fear never really goes away. I guess I always know that there's sort of like all these things that come with it. It's like, all right, there's going to be the guilt of, you know, having to deceive people. There's like the challenge of like jumping on the stage and like disappointing people if it doesn't happen, especially because we'd be going all the way to Nevada, so the stakes are higher. And then, you know, just with the toplessness, it was just like, I gotta start working out like tonight.
Oh.
And, you know, just sort of, you know, kind of fear of like, oh, what are the photographs going to turn out like? Because, you know, butcher sun diet has not always done me well. And so my insecurities definitely came into play around the toplessness for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe so we can talk a little bit more about vulnerability. So you just described one way in which you were vulnerable, which was that, like, you know, a lot of people don't even want to walk around without their shirt on in many circumstances where there aren't like tens of thousands of eyes on them. You were able to do it on stage, on TV. Like, what was I mean, I guess could you reflect on that kind of vulnerability a little bit more? You said that you're a little bit nervous about like being topless on stage.
Yeah. I I definitely have some very deeply rooted insecurities and like body image, you know, just issues with body image and just feeling like, oh, I should be thinner. There's a lot of things on my entire body that I'm not happy with, but on my upper body, you know, it's like, oh, I don't like the way my arms look. Like, there were years whenever I was younger where like I wanted to, you know, get like a boob job because I felt like I had small boobs, and like, and it's just a lot of different things going on for me that I definitely felt like, I mean, I had no idea that it would become, that the images would be used as much as they are, and that it would be so successful in terms of the press and the videos and stuff. And so, because these things are always very hit or miss, and so it's very hard for me to actually picture what the outcome would be like. But you know, knowing that there was like the likelihood that there would be some pictures of it, I wasn't really thinking so much of the people in the crowd, because again, I just don't think I could have really visualized it. I didn't know much about the venue initially, or like what the setup of the stage would be like, and all of that. But yeah, just the idea of like not having my shirt on and just like all that exposure to these parts of my body that I'm not super like happy about. But I, you know, it's also like I had done a topless, been a part of the topless protest that had happened a couple weeks before that at Costco, and so I had already, you know, sort of gotten a taste for like on the smaller scale of like what that was like. Of course, then we were covered much more heavily with like fake blood, and we even put like these special effects makeup on the nipples to make it. And I in some way felt like I was still covered up. It was almost more scary in the sense that I was surrounded by my peers, which was interesting. But I guess I felt like, okay, you know, if I could get through that, then surely I can just take off my shirt for this action. And I think, yeah.
Thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about. I want to add two things. Like, one thing that I talked to Priya about after she did the Jeff Bezos disruption was that what counts as courageous or brave is going to differ for different people. And I think that it sounds to me like you did something incredibly brave. I'm reminded of something that Billie Eilish just did. I don't know if you saw it, but I think it was like a recent concert where she put a video on the screen of her taking her shirt off. And part of her doing that, part of the motivation for doing that was to kind of say that she didn't want to participate in this culture of body shaming anymore. And I think it really inspired a lot of people, because the sorts of concerns that you're articulating are the exact ones that our media, our movies, and our books, and our whole like beauty and makeup industry, and a whole lot of really big interests are working really hard to inspire in lots of people. Like they're working really hard to make us not like the way we look, or to think that the way that we look isn't enough, and we need to do all sorts of things to like change it. I think there's something inspiring about people going out and saying, I'm not going to let all these external forces that are telling me these messages dictate what I do. And I'm wondering, was there anything sort of like that in the way that you were thinking about this this action, or taking your shirt off in the action?
I guess to some degree, yeah, because I had, you know, like I said, experienced it at the Costco action. And, you know, there was a sense of like empowerment that came from that, in that, you know, not everybody agrees with doing that. And, you know, there's just a lot of comments that people make, like, yeah, like commenting on our bodies online, or saying that, you know, that's, you know, like inappropriate, or just like not agreeing with doing that sort of thing, or being you know, the whole like indecent exposure. And I felt like no, like I'm gonna do it again, like I'm gonna do it anyway. And like I got a lot more backlash for this action, and yet still I feel like it only like strengthened that feeling in me, because when we went to do the one in San Jose, which didn't really get much, if any, press, but I told Matt, I was like, I want to do this one topless again. And it was kind of voted out by Core.
Okay.
But I put like red makeup on like this shirt that I had that was like skin tone. And you know, but I was like, I had it on underneath too. I had like the bloody nipples on underneath, just in case.
Just in case.
But yeah. Yeah. Because at that point I was just like, yeah, you know what? Like I'm gonna use this as like an opportunity to speak out more. And I recognize that like it does like gain more attention by doing that too. And for me, it's like why wouldn't I, like, if I'm okay with it, you know, despite the insecurities I have around it, like why should I not do it just because people feel like that it's indecent and inappropriate? And like, yeah, I just don't agree with that. Like, it's my body, I should be allowed to use that for activism if I feel okay with it. So yeah, there's definitely some of that in there.
That's wonderful.
especially the third time around.
The third time, okay, yeah. And I saw those images from the Costco one. Those were some powerful images. I
Yeah.
think I was talking to somebody else who was in those pictures, and she was telling me that she she came into like, I think it was some meeting like on a Sunday, and she walked in and saw like a big picture of all of you standing up, like
Oh.
with your arms up, and you could see all of the blood and the nipples, and she's like, oh, there I am right there on the screen. And I think it just kind of speaks to the power of those images and like of that particular protest, where you're really saying like, this is what dairy does, like this is what the dairy industry um, is doing to like female bodies, that you then walk into a meeting and that's where it is, that's it. um,
Mhm.
yeah, so you sort of alluded to another vulnerability in what you just said. You talked about it, used the words indecent exposure. So
Mhm.
some of the charges that you have in Nevada are indecent exposure charges, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Indecent and obscene exposure.
and obscene. Okay, what's the difference?
Mhm. They just lump it together. They say indecent and
Okay,
obscene exposure. It's just yeah, I don't know what the
yeah,
difference.
yeah, and so and I understand that if you were to get convicted of that, um, things could be difficult in particular ways for I think a 5 year period. Is that right? Is that what? It's like you'd be like 5 years on
Um,
the registry.
I don't know what the length of the
Okay.
year or how many years, but yeah, I mean probably yeah, maybe like a few years or something like that. I mean, it sounds like you probably read up on it more. Um, I yeah, that's actually a good point. I wasn't sure for how long, but
Oh
I
well,
would
don't
it
take like
would.
I don't have I'm not a lawyer like, uh, but yeah, no, that's interesting. So like that's just bizarre, and I think that people should think about how bizarre that is. That like you chose to just take your shirt off, and if I had done that, there'd be no problem. I mean, I don't like. I think like people might still. I mean, there might be some negative commentary if I. But what I'm saying is like if you do it like now it's obscene and it's this like indecent exposure thing. You could be on a sex offender registry for doing something that
Mm,
like if I were to do simply because of like my sex, it wouldn't it wouldn't trigger those charges. Um,
yeah,
and it just strikes me as ridiculous. I mean, it's I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
yeah.
Totally is. I think like once that really sunk in, because at first when they first said it, I was just like, oh yeah, I guess we have to like throw something on it, whatever. But yeah, when it just started sinking in, I was like, this is so like unjust,
Yeah.
and yeah, just absurd. And just the example you use, like if you walked around, if any man like wanted to walk around without their shirt on, and just because I don't know, there's like more like fat around mine, because of a woman, like somehow that makes it indecent and even obscene. Um, it just it honestly makes me feel like I'm living like 200 years ago in these like very backwards thinking times where like women are like objects or owned by men or something. It's just like, wait, like this is it's like my body. How is it inherently obscene? Yeah,
Right.
just as I am, without a shirt on. It's such a ridiculous like old age thinking, and it just feels so outdated and not progressive in any way. And I mean, I didn't even know that it was illegal
Mm-hmm.
in Carson City. And it's hard for me to even believe that it's illegal anywhere, but I guess, I mean, it was illegal in San Jose as well. And it just makes me feel, it makes me wonder, like, have they just not, do they just forget about that law and just maybe haven't, because it's just so obvious to me that it should be legal. And I know that there's like some areas where it is, but it's like gay marriage, it's like, hello, it's just like obvious. Like, of course it should be legal, it's just one of those things.
Right.
Um, And I remember having like a similar feeling so I intentionally made a decision to like stop wearing bras,
Mm-hmm.
like a few years ago. For like similar reasons of like, why am I putting this like contraption over my boobs to like, what is it? It's just like hiding them away, or just like the more I thought about it, it just seemed like, why can't I just wear a shirt without one? Like, why do I
Right.
need to have this thing? And so I intentionally made that decision, and it was really difficult for me. I felt
Hmm.
so insecure to leave the house with it. And it took a while before I like really adjusted to it, and just, now it's like I don't even think about it. Like, and when I do wear a bra on some rare occasions with like a shirt that's see-through or something, it's just like, oh, how did I ever wear this? It's so uncomfortable. And
Hmm.
just thinking how we just feel like we are supposed to wear this, like we should wear this. And when you don't, you get shamed. And I was working at a vegan restaurant in New York, and I got shamed by a coworker who like
Hmm.
pulled me aside, and she's like, hey, I want to tell you this. Like when you're going up and down the stairs, and I see you at work, and I can see your boobs, like just, moving, and it's just like, it's obvious that you're not wearing. And mind you, our dress code was a t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I wore like long sleeves under it. It's like multiple layers. And, she's like, and it was a woman telling me this, which I thought was odd too. And she was just a coworker, but she was telling me how it was distracting the men who were in the kitchen, like making the food. And I, I just, it was just this feeling that washed over me of like anger and like humiliation. Like I felt so embarrassed after that for, you know, maybe like a few weeks. And, like I eventually got over it, and I just felt like, no, like I'm not, like at first I was like, you know what, like I'm going to go out and buy like a bra then. But I had like gotten rid of all of them, and
Mm-hmm.
then over time I was like, you know what, no, like I'm not going to do that. And like it was like a similar feeling of like absurdity, and that, I should not have to like wear a bra with my shirt in order to like make other people, especially other men, like comfortable. And like this has nothing to do with me if they're distracted. And why is it inappropriate for me to be not wearing a bra at work when it's like a t-shirt? It's just,
Right.
so anyway, it's just that it was similar to that feeling, and being told that I'm being charged for indecent and obscene exposure for just having my shirt off is, yeah.
That I find that really interesting. So it's like I want to make sure I understand. So like you're working in this restaurant in New York City. The dress code is just a t-shirt, and then God forbid somebody finds out that you have breasts, and it causes a scandal, and it's like, wait, she has like nipples and they move like, and then so all of a sudden it's this it's this thing where somebody's shaming you for that. And um I don't know, like you talked about this like feeling like washing over you.
Thinking of like embarrassment and just like humiliation and just like
Okay,
this,
got it.
um
Yeah, so it's
yeah.
like embarrassment, humiliation, like, oh shame, I've transgressed a social boundary. I've done something that's
Mhm.
against our cultural standards, kind of like that.
Yeah.
And then when
Yeah.
you find out about the indecent exposure charges, that uniquely, rather than any of the other things, was kind of a reminder of this. It's like, oh no, you've transgressed the social standards for what we do with our bodies.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I find that really interesting because I really enjoy kind of picking apart the different ways that people react to the different things that happen. And is that like a qualitatively different feeling than other criminal charges that you've had?
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so. Because it was just so specific, and especially when Matt um,
Mm-hmm.
explained how it like specifically points out like that it's not okay for women, it's okay for men, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And yeah, very different than like trespassing or disorderly conduct, because there's that sexism that is so
Right.
blatant, just which is very unlike any of the other ones.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because it's like the other criminal charges. It's like, oh, you trespassed. This is like, no, we're gonna shame you for being a woman, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's a horrible, layer of this whole thing. And what I find interesting about it is like you mentioned sexism. Like in this whole story, sexism has been upheld by both male and female like antagonists. So like in the restaurant, it's a woman who told you about it. I guess it was on behalf of
Mm-hmm.
the patriarchy in the kitchen. And then in this particular story, I've seen lots of men and women commenting about this, saying like, "Oh no,
Mm-hmm.
this was like there shouldn't have been nudity. This was shameful." So that's a whole other interesting element. Um, and maybe what we could do is like I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about one of the criticisms that I've seen. Um, let's see. Oh no, wait, I don't want that up yet. So I'm gonna do a screen share, and now you see double, but wait, there we go. Okay, so you can see this one. Do you see the one that says why women trade their sexuality to save animals?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So this was an article, and I don't think I think she's doing something a little more sophisticated than what I was just talking about. She's not just like shaming you. I think what she's doing here is giving kind of an interesting second wave feminist style critique of a particular style of animal rights activism. But this is a piece by
Mm-hmm.
M.K. Fain. It was going around the internet for a while. She published it on Medium originally, but then her account was shut down. So the only way you can see it is if you look at there's some Google Docs that are floating around that have the article. But
Mm-hmm.
what she talks about, so she describes you as one of three women protested topless at a Sanders rally. They're part of a larger narrative of how women's labor is valued. Um, and I think if we kind of go down, so one of the lines that we see is, it's unlikely that this is just due to Bernie's. So to talk about, okay, this is the first time DXC has gotten this much action for a protest at a Sanders event, and it's gotten a lot of attention. Like New York Times talked about it in an article that we can look at in a minute. But this what is let dairy die and why
Mm-hmm.
why is it all over the Democratic race? Like that was a fantastic article, and what it did was it really kind of showed the message that you had. Like it had quotes from activists. But yeah, so that's what MK is pointing out. And I just highlighted parts. So it goes, it's unlikely that this is just due to Bernie's success in early primary states. The female nudity on display made it a bigger story. Men had plenty to say about the protests, like podcast host Jake Flores, who tweeted, "Do anybody want to come protest Bernie Sanders propping up of the dairy industry in my apartment?" And then many men replied with misogyny, calling the protesters sexist slurs or commenting about getting something for free. There were more than enough jokes made about the protest taking place in Nevada. Sanders himself cracked a joke stating, "This is Nevada. There's always a little bit of excitement at no extra cost." These sorts of comments are not a surprise, and the protesters certainly know what they were getting into. So why would these women put themselves in such a vulnerable position? And MK gives an answer to this question later on. But what I'm wondering is, what's your answer to this question? The question is, why do people put themselves in such a vulnerable position?
Well, for me, it's because I feel like it is worth it to put myself out there in that way in order to, speak on behalf of animals who can't in that way. So that's something I see as like a small sacrifice in, the larger picture of what's happening to dairy cows and of course other animals, in the farming industry, along with like the reason why I do any of the activism that I do is because I feel, because I don't know, I'm pretty much willing to do anything with that frame of mind if I feel that it's going to be effective and get that message out there. You know, whether that means prison, whether that means jumping on a stage topless, like that's a privilege that I have that I want to use, I guess. So yeah.
And when you talk about prison, I don't really hear any fear in your voice. Are you afraid of going to prison?
I mean, I guess my short answer would be, I mean, maybe a little bit. I'm sure that like when it comes closer to the time, I don't know if I have necessarily fear around it as much as I do of like, what is the emotion I feel around it? I guess there's some uncertainty with it. I mean, I've had friends who've been to prison, and I know that it's not like federal prison. And I feel like I'm someone who can adjust to my surroundings. I also know that it would be difficult, I'm sure. Like, I know that there would be a lot of aspects of it that would be very difficult. But I guess it doesn't feel real that that's like an actual reality.
Okay.
And I think that the closer it gets, there would probably be some like anxiousness.
Sure. And that reminds me of how you were describing the lead up to the Bernie Sanders disruption, where when Matt first contacted you, it was like, oh, exciting, intriguing. And then it's like, you said that you two had a discussion where you sort of mutually figured out that it was going to be topless. And then at that point, there's a little bit of fear.
Mm-hmm.
I think often it's hard for us to really, cash the emotional check in advance for something that we're not really sure. That was a weird metaphor, and I'm sorry about that. But I think like it's hard to get like an advance installment of like the emotion associated with something that we've never experienced before.
Right, and I think that that's definitely like I've been to jail many times. I've spent 4 consecutive days and gone through housing, but I know that that's not. It would be very different to actually spend years in prison, even 1 year in prison. I think 1 year in prison, I'd be like, okay, if it was like 2 years, all right. Like anything beyond 2 years might be like, all right.
Yeah.
Because, but also, like you said, there's just no way of knowing what that's actually going to be like. And all you can really do, I guess, like what I feel when I think of prison is just sort of like an acceptance. Okay. It's like an acceptance that like it's going to be shitty. There's going to be a lot of parts of it that are going to be very difficult. I'd probably cry a lot, but also like I think I would learn a lot, and I would empathize with the people who I meet in there who have probably had way harder lives and have been through a lot more and have a lot less support than I do. And for me, going to prison would be like, there'd be all this press that came from it. There'd be people who cared about me on the outside. I'd get like visits. It would be sensationalized, versus like a lot of the people who are in prison now. It's just a lot of them are just alone. They have nobody. They're in there because of their financial circumstances, or just the fact that they've been, put into positions that they've, done these things that I can't even fathom like having to do. And so I've seen like glimpses of that in jail, and I think that overall, like I would just accept whatever it was and adapt, knowing that there's going to be a lot of like ups and downs with it.
Yeah, wonderful. So you've gotten a little taste of it in jail, and I think you're willing to take that risk because you see it sort of as serving the greater good, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back
Yeah.
to like MK's question, so why do you put yourself in a vulnerable position? From what you were describing, I think it's like from I think what I was hearing was that um, you see it as just for the greater good. It's what's important. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering whether one other thing that we talked a little about earlier was the idea of like you were all set to go do it a third time, right? And then it got
Mm-hmm.
voted down in core. And after the second time, the decision to want to do it a third time was there a feeling of like I want to kind of do this as like a protest, like protesting against sexism, and like you wanted to sort of do an empowering thing by being naked on stage, or like was that at all part of it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I was actually feeling frustrated as I was being told like, no, you can't do this, because
Right.
I felt like, well, I want to, like, damn it, like I wanted, yeah, like, well, why can't I? This is my body, that sort of thing. And it sort of didn't matter like who was telling me no. It was just this feeling of like, you know, uh, yeah, not being able, and I think their logic made sense because it was more about, you know, uh, breaking the terms of release, and like it would have been possible that I would have had to like stay in the Nevada jail for you know, until I don't know if, I guess it's basically until the next court, basically like being there for a month.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so it made sense why they were telling me no. But
Yeah.
yeah, I felt this sort of like, oh, you're gonna charge me with indecent exposure? Like, I'm just gonna do it again. You know, like, it was
Right.
definitely, I mean, yeah, definitely that sort of I don't know what you call it, but yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of like a defiance. And that's been
Mhm.
an important form of protest for a long time. We have like Femin doing like shirtless protests all over Europe. You have, I mean, there's all sorts of groups that do that. So I think like that's another reason why you put yourself in a vulnerable position. It's to kind of like protest the very conditions that render that condition vulnerable. It's to kind of
Hmm.
say like what we
Yeah,
want to
good
do
word.
is challenge the sexism that says, oh, that part of your body is sexualized now, and that means that you need to be shamed about it and you need to hide it. Um,
Yeah, that was a great way of putting it.
well, thanks. Um, yeah, I want to look a little bit more at her thing. So let's see. So it's doing the screen share now again, right?
Yeah.
Are you able to see it?
Mhm.
Cool. Um, okay. So at this part of the piece, MK talks a little bit about a situation she had with a slaughterhouse, and she got to know somebody who was a slaughterhouse
Mhm.
worker. They ended up flirting a little bit, and as a result, she was able to get him to release a whole bunch of chickens to her. And I think what she was talking about, this is sort of a crucial line. I didn't highlight it, but the one here. Eventually, I felt so anxious about the whole ordeal, and I stopped responding to him. As a survivor of sexual violence, the idea of turning over my body like that was too far for me, especially when we had other means to rescue animals. We ended up saving over 20 other lives that year from local slaughterhouses. And so I think that she made a absolutely reasonable choice to stop participating in it. But I could see how like one thing I really find interesting about this piece is that it's such a nuanced discussion of the ways that in her case she was kind of trading sex for mercy, which is how she puts it, you know, in the next paragraph, and the difficulty of doing that, and the anxiety that can come with that. And basically what she's saying is that in a lot of different facets of life, women have traded sex for mercy. And she writes that it's the only thing patriarchy truly values from women. And she talks a little bit about the, who was it? Ward. Kaylin Ward, who was, I guess, an Instagram model. And she would send nudes to people if they, sorry, yeah, she
Mhm.
would send nudes for $10. And MK kind of says, well, this is another sort of example of this. And then she goes on and she says this sort of happens a lot in the animal rights movement. She talks about PETA. She says sexual exploitation of women in the animal rights movement is not caused by PETA or DXC. Many organizations are by men or women themselves who have engaged in self-objectifying actions to make a difference, like myself. This pattern emerges as a direct result of the gendered burden of care, which drives women to feel a responsibility to help the devaluing of feminine labor and care ethics beyond that which is sexually gratifying to men. In short, it's patriarchy. And so what I hear her saying is this, and you can tell me whether this is your interpretation of it too. What I hear her saying is that because of patriarchy, there's the gendering of certain kinds of labor. Up here, she talks about work that's deemed feminine being undervalued in the movement, and then I think she's saying that these kinds of dynamics push women to do activities that objectify themselves for the greater good, in ways that are sexually gratifying to men, and that this is a problem. And so, like, I think there's a couple of huge differences between, like, a lot of the time when this happens and what you folks did in the disruption. Like, you weren't doing something where you're like, hey, look at this sexy image. What you were doing was you were saying, I'm, like, showing you what happens in the dairy industry. Like, I think you weren't deliberately, like, sexualizing yourself. But what I take MK to be saying is that part of the reason why there was so much press was precisely that it created a situation where other men, without your consent, sexualized you, including Bernie Sanders and the podcast hosts who were talking about that earlier in the article, and that itself perpetuates a problematic dynamic that she wants to critique as part of her general critique of patriarchy. And I hope that's a fair characterization of what she's saying. And I'm wondering if I could sort of get your reaction to that critique. And we can work together on if it's, because I don't know if you've considered the specific way of framing it before.
Yeah, I mean, when I read over it, it was the first time, it was a lot to take in, and there was a lot of like very powerful statements that were, like, honestly resonated a lot with me. And my reaction to what you said is that, like, yes, I think there's truth to that, and I'm not going to, I won't deny that patriarchy was definitely a key aspect of the success of that action, like contributing to patriarchy and sexism. Does that outweigh the benefits of the success of that action? And I don't know that I have an answer to that. And I think that she brought up a lot of really great points. I got to know Mary Kate really well in Philly, and so I have a lot of respect for her as a person. And I believe she actually emailed me about that article and, like, had wanted to talk to me. And I think I just had, like, a lot going on or something, and I didn't respond to her in time to when she published it. But I know that she's someone who has a lot of knowledge on this and has done she just has, like, a lot of impressive background on this topic and knows way more about it than me. And so, yeah, I guess I think that there's a lot of hard to hear truth to what she was saying.
Yeah, and I think that's an incredibly fair response. And for what it's worth, one thing I love about this is at the end she goes, from an anti-speciesist perspective, maybe it is worth it to do it, even as a feminist analysis might tell us otherwise. So I think that what I hear her doing is kind of grappling with the same concern that you're talking about, which is, like, at the end of the day, we really don't know. We're kind of like we're, like, doing our best to make perfect calculations with imperfect data, and we don't often know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's good that we're talking about this because I wanted to see you kind of like grapple with this style of concern.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think is worth bringing up though in response to it is that like you articulated kind of a feminist justification for the action, which was to say that we really do need to get rid of these indecent exposure laws, and we really need to get rid of this culture of shaming women for having breasts while also having like all sorts of expectations for what their breasts should look like, and just giving you like a whole mess of contradictions about how you should feel about your body. Like that needs to stop. And there's a sense in which the kinds of protests that you're doing and the ways that you're conceiving about them might play a role in like challenging some of those patriarchal practices. So I think even like the feminist analysis isn't entirely clear. It's not entirely clear to say that just because some other people objectified you without your consent doesn't mean that the net result of this is going to be more objectification. It might be that actions like this kind of normalize having people show their breasts in public and kind of inspire other people to reject all the voices that are telling us like feel shame, hide your body, don't put it in public.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I know that a lot of other activists around the world have been doing a lot of topless actions recently, by being inspired by the actions that we've done at Costco and Nevada. And so, yeah, and I think that's great to see. I certainly feel empowered whenever I see that, because I assume that was probably difficult for them to do as well, and it is challenging a whole another different set of norms. And similarly, again, to just like not wearing a bra, it's just like this subtle little thing, but it sort of changes that norm around wearing a bra so that your boobs look a certain way, or just because it's like, oh my God, you can see the nipple.
Yeah, people try very hard to pretend that other humans don't have nipples for some reason. Yeah. Wonderful. So I think this has been a really good conversation. We've been talking for I think about an hour and 15 minutes. And I think we've covered like a really specific narrow aspect of this protest very well in a lot of depth, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have had this conversation with you. Is there anything else that you want to say? Or anything else you want to talk? Well, I guess one thing I wanted to ask you about was like just like self-care and like trauma and what activists can do, because the situation you went through on the stage was hard. I've talked to a lot of activists about the kinds of self-care activities that they do, and I think that I see a lot of people get burned out, especially when they go to a lot of save vigils. Like they'll experience the suffering of animals in a very, very visceral way, and then after a little bit, they get burned out, and then they're kind of done. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for activists for how to like, I don't know, keep going, how to take care of themselves.
Well, I think like first and foremost is being surrounded, and I know this is, I feel like I have a lot of privilege even just saying this, but having a community of support around you, regularly talking with and interacting with other in-person activists and vegans who are supportive of you, who know you, who are doing the same thing, and just feeling that sense of camaraderie and not feeling alone. And to me, I mean, it's why I moved to Berkeley, and this isn't a move to Berkeley pitch, but, wherever you can find that, I think that's really, really crucial. I mean, if you can get that online, then that's great too. But I don't think I would have been able to sustain myself or feel as empowered without people around me who are, just fully believing in me and what we're doing. And if you don't have that, again, online stuff, but as far as self-care, like, I think, there's a lot of pressure to just keep going, push yourself, not just with activism, but, just our society in general. And I think there are different, I've been doing activism for like 6 years. Like, there are times when I was much, much more involved, and there were times when I was much, like, barely involved at all. And so I think it's completely okay, and being like kind and patient with yourself, that, like, yes, there's a lot of suffering happening. Yes, it's urgent. And, like, so is your mental health and sustainability. And so not being hard on yourself if you don't do any activism for 6 months, and then, or do a different type of activism that doesn't seem as, maybe it's not as visible, but you're still feeling like you're doing something. But just being okay with that, and just trying to resist that feeling of guilt that comes with it, and just knowing that just because you're not doing as much right now doesn't mean that that's how it will always be. There's just, like, the fluctuation, and that's something I experienced after, when I stopped being a full-time activist with DXC, or getting paid for it. I experienced a lot of that in the months following it, and then I've been slowly sort of easing my way into it and just doing, certain things. But just being gentle and patient and kind with yourself in your capacity, because it is a lot, and there's a lot of suffering. And if you're ignoring, because this is what I felt like I did, like, while I was doing it full time, was, and it's part of the culture of it too. It's like, it's like, I didn't go on vacation that entire time. I just, like, sat on my laptop and, like, worked. And because there's no, like, end date for these things, it's just like, it's always happening. It's always going on for the foreseeable future. You never felt like your work was done. So just, I found that what I needed to do was just sort of stop, take a step back, and, get a therapist, and, try to eat or exercise a little bit better, although I'm still working on that one. I don't know. For me, it was like going to music shows and just doing things that you enjoy doing. I guess all the basic things that people tell you to do. But yeah, it's like community and patience and forgiveness with yourself in your own capacity.
Good. Thank you. So I guess, like, as you say, these are all the things that all people tell you to do, and now our viewers have Rachel telling you to do those things too. So go out and do them. I think we should just say goodbye to our viewers. So thank you so much for tuning in and watching this. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And thank you, Rachel, for participating. I really enjoyed getting to know you, learning more about the action, and just kind of really delving in depth about, or really delving in like a lot of depth into your role in the action. So thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was great talking to you, and contemplated a lot of things I've never contemplated before. So it was a good discussion.